Welcome to The Forecast, a podcast by Brand the Growth Agency. I'm your host, Morgan Willis. On each episode of The Forecast, we'll ask our guests to give their forecast for the future of their area of expertise. We'll talk through media, marketing, and advertising trends, and sometimes we might get into some other fun too. Our guest for this episode is Drew Pedersen, Senior Account Executive at The Trade Desk, one of the largest independent advertising platforms for CTV, display, audio, and more. Today, Drew and I will chat about the growth of audio streaming, podcasts moving to video, and why he's so passionate about audio. So yes, this is a podcast about podcasts. Drew, nice to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Morgan. Glad to be here.
So whether it's streaming music, podcasts, or radio, audio advertising is growing. Can you tell me a little bit about how the Trade Desk is adapting to meet this growing demand?
Yeah, absolutely. So, really one thing that we've done really well at the Trade Desk and why we've been so successful over the last several years is we are always adapting to meet the needs of our advertisers. So as that pertains to audio, what I'm going to talk about right now are some really cool things we've done in inventory, and then I'll get into measurement. But to start with inventory, so there's really been three publishers that have really had a stronghold on the audio space over the last several years. And that's going to be SiriusXM, which also includes Pandora, Spotify, and iHeart. But not only that, there's a lot of these emerging audio companies that are stepping up into the space like Dax, Deezer, Entercom, Target Spot, the list goes on. And what's happening is a lot of these more emerging audio companies are starting to force innovation from some of those major publishers in the space. So one thing I'll talk about is what Spotify is doing. But before I get into that, I think it's really important to talk about what SiriusXM has been doing since 2018. So in terms of SiriusXM and biddable audio, they've actually been doing this since 2018. So in terms of their programmatic maturity, SiriusXM is very far along in their journey in terms of making their inventory available via biddable. Now, Spotify, which has a massive ad-enabled user base, previously, if you wanted to put them on a plan, you'd have to go buy direct from Spotify or you'd have to place that via PG. And what happens, as you know, Morgan, when you're pacing direct IO or PG, you're going to lose a lot of those functionalities and benefits of programmatic, such as how is that really taking into account the user journey and what role does audio play within that? And there's so many things you can do in programmatic from a targeting, optimization, and measurement standpoint that some of these major publishers are starting to evolve their offering, such as Spotify. So several months ago, Spotify actually, they opened up what's called the Spotify Ad Exchange, also known as SAX. And what that is that's ultimately an SSP where they're now making their inventory in terms of streaming music and audio video, which I know we're going to talk about here in a little bit, available via biddable through the Trade Desk. So that's been one thing that's really happened in terms of innovation this year. And it's representing a complete paradigm shift with all of the massive scale we're seeing across the major publishers, the emerging companies. And so there's a lot of really cool things we're doing there from an inventory standpoint. But what I just touched on was actually just streaming music and podcasts. What a lot of people don't think of is there's a couple of other buckets of inventory within audio that aren't really as common as the two we're talking about now. So one of those is actually connected car inventory. So we also have integrations with SiriusXM, which includes Pandora and Stitcher. And if you think about connected car inventory, where the time is spent within audio, a lot of that is actually spent during your commute. So that's a really critical piece of the plan. And then that fourth kind of bucket of audio inventory I was referring to comes down to smart speakers. So we have access to Sonos, Amazon Alexa, Google Home, and that's another device type that we can tap into through audio as well. So that's everything we're doing from an inventory perspective.
So audio isn't new, right? Radio has been around forever. Even audio streaming like Spotify or Pandora, those have been around for, I think, over a decade, at least now. Why is audio streaming becoming popular for advertisers now? Why in 2025? Why has it taken this long for it to be a popular medium for advertisers?
Yeah. So I would say that the amount of time spent with the channel has reached a point where it is just impossible to ignore. There's more time spent with audio than any other channel. And that includes CTV, that includes social media. So with about 3 hours a day per user of time spent, it just marks such a major opportunity to get your ads in front of users where they're inviting you into your lives at multiple intersections throughout the day. So I would say that's kind of the first reason, right? Is it's now reached a point of time spent that is just impossible to ignore. And I think the second part of that is there's just really been a lack of industry thought leadership, kind of like we're doing right now, right? There hasn't been a lot of the major agencies that are talking about this. There's been a hyper focus on CTV for the last several years, and no one's really talking audio. And I just think it's like been that lack of thought leadership, and then it's also been the lack of innovation, right? Like Sirius has been doing this since 2018, making their audio inventory available via biddable, but their next biggest competitor, Spotify, you weren't able to buy any of that via biddable really until now. And so that's just such a major deal. And I would say that, between those things, that's why it hasn't taken off like it should until 2025.
Yeah, your first point about it needing to be tied back to performance of some kind is really important for a lot of agencies. Rain is a performance first agency. Almost everything we do needs to be tied back to that lower funnel conversion metric for our clients. And over the past year or so, we've seen that explode with audio. We've seen all of these measurement platforms. Now they're measuring audio, and audio has done really well for us. So I think that's one of the reasons it's surprising to me that it's taking this long. The channel performs so well for our clients. Now, the industry buzzword right now, as you know, is artificial intelligence, AI. Everybody's talking about it. Let's touch on what you think audio AI tools will look like in the future. How will AI affect the audio advertising space?
Yeah. So AI, the way I think about it is AI has just really always naturally existed in the streaming audio space. So you think about you're listening to podcasts, you're listening to music, and those content recommendation engines in Spotify and Pandora are always going to recommend your next song or your next podcast based on your previous browsing behavior. So there's always been AI really within this space since we even started talking about it here in 2025. And not only that, you think about programmatic and what we're talking about today. AI is what powers programmatic in the real-time bidding and how we express our bids. There's so much AI that goes into this. But I think you were asking about like what AI looks like in a forward state. I'm going to tell you about two really cool things we're doing right now with AI. One in terms of brand safety, and then I'll touch on some really cool stuff we're doing in terms of creative production. So for 2025, we've partnered with a company called Barometer, which is an AI company that's built specifically for brand safety for podcasts. And the way it works is ultimately you'll get a desired episode that you're looking to run against. Barometer can actually ingest that full scribe, that full transcript of the episode, and they'll go in and they'll mark that for one. If it's no risk, you're live, good to go. If there is risk, they'll put it into kind of a low, medium, and high risk category by applying things like tonal analysis. So one example I like to talk about, especially with all the kind of buzz in today's news, is like the word conservative, for example. So that might be mentioned a few times on a podcast. And if it's being used in that political sense, maybe that's not brand safe for that given advertiser. But if conservative is being used more as an adjective, then that's totally okay. Go ahead and run against that podcast. So that's some cool stuff we're doing specifically with AI and brand safety.
Right. So, just for example, if you had a finance podcast and they said, I'm conservative with how I spend my money on the podcast, that's not going to be flagged as political then, which makes sense, right? You wouldn't want that to be flagged as political. It's not political. So that's an interesting way to parse out which options are brand safe and which ones are not.
Exactly. And then the other really cool thing, you don't really think of the trade desk and think of us producing creative. However, what we're able to do now is actually produce audio creative directly through the platform. Now, true to the trade desk, we're building products to suit the needs of our advertisers. And what we found with this massive explosion of audio was that even our largest clients and mid-sized clients that are spending tons in every other channel, display, CTV, online video, you name it, all of these massive advertisers and agencies actually didn't have audio creative. A majority of them didn't. So born out of the need for that, we now have an integration directly in the platform with a company called Bunny Studios. We're actually able to go into the platform and you can select from 100 different languages, 100 different accents, and you can turn around 3 different versions of that creative within 48 hours, all directly within the platform.
What do you think about the difference between host read or canned creative. This is I always hear the host read ones versus the canned when I'm listening. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so my opinion might be a little biased because within programmatic, you're not going to be able to do those live reads, right? What we're looking at is 15, 30-second spots that are inserted throughout that content. Now, I would argue that those are just as powerful, if not, in my opinion, even more powerful than that of a host read. So personally, when I'm consuming podcasts, I know that there's about a 4-minute ad bank at the beginning of my podcast, and I'm just going to skip that 15 seconds at a time until I hear the content that I want to hear. So I would say that running programmatic is much more effective if you're looking at that kind of view. But at the end of the day, I do know that there's a lot of trust and credibility that's gleaned from these hosts and whatnot. And I think there's some value in both of those.
Yeah, that part about skipping at the beginning rings true to me. And I do agree that there's value in both. They both have their place. Would you be able to give me a quick explanation of what programmatic is? I know we keep bringing up the word, but for anybody who's listening to this podcast, maybe they're not in the ad tech space like you and I are. What does programmatic mean?
Totally. Yeah. So programmatic is the automated way to buy ads across the most premium publishers on the open internet. So it's an automated process. If you're looking to buy ads on CTV, you might be want to look on Disney or Hulu across the open internet. You might want to be on premium news sites, whether that's local news sites, national news sites, ESPN, you name it. So we can really reach every premium site outside of the walled gardens and social media.
Right. So you're running through a platform like the Trade Desk and you can target pretty much anything. The other alternative to that is going direct and saying, I want to run on ESPN, and you go to ESPN and you just run there. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's that. And then there's kind of an intermediary format, which would be programmatic guaranteed. But yeah, pretty much had that right.
So I don't know about you, but when I'm listening to podcasts, I generally just listen, right? I'm doing chores around the house, listening to my favorite podcast. There's been a growing trend of people watching podcasts. And actually, for this podcast, The Forecast, the majority of people watch it on YouTube rather than listen to it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Can you tell me a little bit about how you think the growth of watching podcasts is going to affect the audio advertising landscape?
Yeah. So I was kind of with you in the same boat where I heard that people are watching podcasts and there's this ongoing trend. And from my case study of one, I never watch podcasts. Where I'm consuming is mostly on my commute in and out of San Francisco, and I'm listening for about 2.5, 3 hours a day. And my phone's always in my pocket. So I started asking like family, friends, colleagues, hey, are you guys watching your podcasts? And kind of started getting a resounding amount of yeses. And I was thinking, I'm like, okay, well, so is my like video just playing in my pocket while I'm on BART? One of the coolest things is that with video in terms of podcasts, it actually doesn't play unless the device is in your phone and you're interacting with Spotify, with Pandora, or any of these audio apps. And so if you're like me or you, and your phone's sitting there in your pocket, those videos actually don't play. So from a viewability standpoint, got to have great viewability in the audio space. And just to kind of quantify that growth you were talking about, per Spotify, there's been a 48% increase in the amount of time spent with video content over the last 3 years. So tons of exploding action going on there. And what I really like is, while audio is absolutely Spotify's superpower, you can use video to reach a leaned in, engaged audience and really maximize campaign effectiveness and drive results across the customer journey. So at the Trade Desk, we know when you go omni-channel, you're going to see double-digit CPA gains anytime you add another channel. And so what I think is really cool is you can actually run audio and video through a lot of these partners as well, in addition to all the other channels like CTV, display, that you might be naturally running through the Trade Desk. So I see a lot of opportunity there. And at the end of the day, what we've seen when users are exposed to both audio, video, and the audio itself, we've seen elevated brand awareness, purchase intent, and things like incremental sales. So I think it just lends itself to success for all advertisers.
It sounds like using both in concert with one another is the best way to go there. You advertise both on the audio and the video versions of the podcast. They work together to create a better campaign for everyone.
Yeah, and you want to tie that one-to-one attribution. And the other really cool thing you can do is, at the user level, when you have cross-device enabled, you can make sure you're reaching that user in sequence with whatever ad we know is going to drive the most success. So, yeah.
You're clearly somebody who's very passionate about audio. Can you tell me about your journey through your career and how you came to be so passionate about the audio space?
Totally. So I'll start with kind of like what brought me here today in front of you and why I'm at the trade desk. But I started in digital media back in 2011. So I've been in digital media for 14 years now. I would live down in LA. I started off on the publisher side. I actually worked for the largest publisher on the planet at the time, was called Time Inc. Time Inc. was acquired by Meredith Corporation and then merged with Dot Dash, where it became Meredith Dot Dash. But I was always really on the publisher side. And what I noticed at sales when I was at Time or I was at Fortune is I was selling like site direct sponsorships or banners on my website, and I was competing with the other reps that were selling technology and measurable outcomes, like the Trade Desk and other competing. At the time there were ad networks and other DSPs, and I was just kind of getting my tail kicked by all the people that were selling results and performance and technology. So that's what really kind of piqued my interest early in the day. And also, back in 2011, a lot of this, programmatic and ad networks, like these things were just getting started. And so for a young kid that was starting my career, I knew that I wanted to be a part of something where I can get in the early days and continue to grow. And yeah, so ended up being there. I was on the publishing side. I eventually moved to management, and I was a manager of the West Coast of our targeted technology division. And within that division, we had seats at 5 different DSPs, and I quickly got exposure to all of their value props, what their service models were. And that's where I was exposed to companies like the Trade Desk and really saw how these guys and us, I would say, set ourselves apart from the competition. So 2022, I decided to make a move over to the Trade Desk, and I've been here for 3 years in our San Francisco office as a senior account executive. Um, the most important part of that question is what makes me so passionate about audio, right? So for me, this answer boils down to 3 core components that all kind of work with each other. So the first part is going to be time spent. The time spent with audio is immense, to the tune of about 3 hours a day per user. And one cool thing, I mentioned my passion about the Trade Desk, right? We represent the open internet, which in total is about 7 hours a day of time spent. So there's so many points we can have to reach that user throughout the day. But within that 7 hours that the Trade Desk represent in the open internet, audio represents 3 hours of that, or 40%. So you think about the time spent with audio compared to even CTV or social media, audio is leading the charge by far. So the first part of my answer is because of the time spent.
And when you're saying that we spend 7 hours a day with the open internet and 3 hours with audio, is that everything, podcasts, radio, things like Spotify, etc.?
Yeah. So when I break that down, that's actually podcasts come in just under an hour, and then streaming music comes in just under 2 hours, and that is per the Global Web Index. So that was point one. But point two, I talked about the amount of time spent. The second part is the quality of that time spent. So per Nielsen, 79% of audio exposures actually happens while no other visual media can be in front of that or distracting that user. So that means that 79% of the time when audio ads are served, there's no CTV or TV playing in the background. There's no video playing on your desktop. You are completely undistracted. And what that leads to from a cognitive load standpoint is it's really easy for your brain to process these ads. So now we're looking at increased ad awareness, ad recall, brand consideration, and you're moving users down the funnel. So that's one, time spent. Two is the quality of time spent. And three, to kind of bring this all home, is that audio is hands down the most on sale corner of the open internet. And what I mean when I say that is, one, we talked about all the avails and all the supply that's going on right now. So yes, it's on sale because there's so many opportunities to reach users throughout their day across all of these audio offerings. But not only that, the craziest thing to me is that only a single digit percentage of ad dollars are actually being spent on the channel. And I'm just going to pause there because this is a big deal.
That's surprising to me with how much availability there is for it, with 3 hours a day for each of us listening to audio. That's surprising that so little is being spent on this channel.
So now you see why I'm kind of coming out of my chair over here. Like, this is insane. The fact that there's so much time spent, and actually per the Global Web Index, only 4% of advertising dollars are being spent against the channel.
So that's okay. So if you're spending 7 hours of your day with the open internet and 3 hours with audio, that's almost, what is that, about 40% there?
Yes.
So there's a huge gap.
70 or 40% of your time with the open internet.
Right.
But for me, you talk about that huge gap. Like, look what happened with CTV coming out of the pandemic. You had, we're all locked at home for a year. And what happened? Everyone started increasing the number of subscriptions, increasing the amount of minutes and hours they were spending with streaming. And coming out of the pandemic, it looked exactly the same. The time spent with CTV was all the way up here, yet the dollars against the channel were not even close to being caught up. Well, now here we are 5 years later in 2025. And guess what happened, Morgan? Spend is caught up to time spent.
Drew, on this podcast, we like to ask for our guests' predictions, their forecast, if you will. Could you give us your forecast for the future of audio advertising over the next 5 or so years?
Yes, sir. So the first one, I'm just going to give you kind of a broad prediction. I'm just going to broadly, I would say, predict that time spent with digital audio continues to increase in the coming years. The next thing I'll say is that similar to the Delta coming out of the pandemic, kind of referred to earlier, I think that spend is going to catch up with time spent by 2030. And you look at my little case study of spend catching up from 2020 in CTV to here we are in 2025. I'm going to give that another 5-year cycle, and I think spend will be at parity with that time spent.
In terms of total spend, just to kind of quantify that, per Statista this year, there's an expected $12.1 billion to be spent on the channel. My prediction is that by 2030, that's going to exceed $15 billion and 20% growth. And then lastly, I think that if you think about programmatic, display was pretty much the original channel of programmatic, and now we've evolved over the decades, and now CTV is virtually table stakes on every media plan. And what I'm going to predict is that audio is also going to be up there and will be on 75+% of media plans by 2030.
Thanks for coming on to the show, Drew.
Thanks for having me.
The Forecast is powered by Rain the Growth Agency, a leading independent advertising agency. I'm your host, Morgan Willis. Art design is by Eric Hernandez, production by Beatrice Livioco. The show is edited by Morgan Willis and Eric Hernandez. Follow along with the show on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or wherever you enjoy listening to stay in the loop. We'll see you next time.